December 1989. The entire world was glued to television screens. One of the most fortified communist regimes in Eastern Europe did not just fade away. It collapsed in a chaotic, violent explosion. At the center stood two people, Nicolae Ceaușescu and his wife, Elena. For decades, this duo held Romania in a grip of steel. They ruled through fear, unrelenting propaganda, and absolute surveillance. How did they maintain control for so long? Logic suggests a powerful army. But the real weapon was psychological terror. Archival footage shows the reality. Thousands of people fill the squares. They hold portraits. They shout slogans. But the camera captures the truth in their eyes. Panic, not loyalty. At first glance, a devoted nation. But in reality, a population held hostage. The personality cult was suffocating. Ordinary Romanians were afraid to speak the dictator's names inside their own homes. Microphones were everywhere. Neighbors reported on neighbors. But this silence could not last forever. Everything changed in a matter of days. The fear evaporated. The shouting started. The couple fled the capital by helicopter, leaving their power behind. There was no escape. Elena stood next to her husband against a wall. The trial was one of the fastest in the history of the 20th century. The video record is grainy but clear. The soldiers raised their rifles. The sound of automatic fire echoes. The regime fell. 120 bullets. That was the specific count used by the firing squad. The execution ended one of the fastest trials of the 20th century. The soldiers did not hesitate. But long before the cold wall and the smell of gunpowder, there was a quiet, muddy village. January 7th, 1916. Elena Petrescu was born in Petrești, deep in Dâmbovița County. The soil here was hard. Her family was poor and worked the land from dawn until dusk. Survival took precedence over study. Elena attended school for only a few years. Teachers noticed the problem immediately. She struggled to read the simplest sentences. Writing was a physical torture for her. Why did she fail so miserably? It wasn't just a lack of time. It was a lack of capacity. She barely mastered the alphabet. The village remembered her not as a prodigy, but as the girl who couldn't learn. But ambition does not require a diploma. As a teenager, Elena gathered her meager belongings and moved to Bucharest. She needed money. She found a place on the assembly line of a textile factory. The noise of the looms was deafening. Later, she secured a position as a laboratory assistant at the Bucharest Institute of Chemistry. At first glance, a step into the world of science. But in reality, she washed test tubes and swept the floors. She knew nothing of formulas, but she understood power. During these years, she entered the underground world of politics. The monarchy still ruled Romania. The Communist Party was banned. Police hunted its members. In 1939, Elena officially received her party card. That same year, she met him, Nicolae Ceaușescu. He was 5 years younger. He was short, aggressive, and stammered when he spoke. But his dossier was impressive. Police files show. Nicolae was already a veteran of the prison system. They bonded instantly. It was a partnership built on shared resentment and rigid ideology. Events accelerated. World War II burned across Europe. When the smoke cleared, the Soviet Union dictated the future. 1947. King Michael was forced to abdicate at gunpoint. He left the country. Romania was declared a People's Republic. The party took absolute control, backed by Soviet tanks. Nicolae began his ascent. Under the iron leadership of Gheorghe Gheorghiu Dej, he climbed the party ladder. He was ruthless. Elena stayed in the shadows. She held no high office yet. But she was always present. She worked in the party bureaucracy, memorizing faces and filtering information. She became a trusted insider. She became his shield. Then came the turning point. Gheorghiu Dej died in 1965. The funeral procession moved through Bucharest. Nicolae seized the vacuum. He became the new general secretary. He promised to distance Romania from Moscow's leash. Elena's visibility exploded. The footage shows she stands right beside him, no longer in the background. Despite having no formal education, she was appointed to the Romanian Academy. Professors remained silent. Fear was already stronger than academic integrity. State honors began to pile up on her desk. Her rise had begun. 1971. That was the year everything changed. Nicolae Ceaușescu returned from China and North Korea with a new vision. He did not just want obedience, he wanted worship. Inspired by Asian totalitarianism, he launched the July Theses. It was a cultural revolution on European soil. Strict ideological control tightened around the nation like a vice. Censorship increased instantly. But the most significant shift was the elevation of the leaders. The personality cult began here. Elena Ceaușescu stepped out of the shadows. Her image began to dominate public life. State television broadcast her face daily. Newspapers printed her profile on the front pages. She was no longer just the wife. She was the mother of the nation. The state machine worked tirelessly to craft a specific persona, a role model for women, a guide for the youth. The propaganda was aggressive and relentless. How did a woman with limited education become a scientific icon? The answer was simple. The regime rewrote reality. She was officially presented as a brilliant researcher and a genius academic. Her new title was mandatory: Dr. Engineer Elena Ceaușescu. At public events, announcers read long lists of her honors. The introductions dragged on for minutes, but it was a facade. She had no proven contributions to science. In 1974, she was named head of the National Council for Science and Technology. At first glance, a bureaucratic appointment, but in reality, a seizure of absolute control. She now held the keys to every laboratory and university in Romania. She decided who received funding. She decided who kept their jobs. Real chemists faced a grim choice: cite Elena in their papers or lose their careers. They added her name to discoveries she never witnessed. They applauded her at conferences while she spoke nonsense. Silence was not an option. Foreign recognition was manufactured the same way. Diplomatic channels pressured foreign institutions to grant her honorary degrees. Universities in the West often complied to maintain political ties. The footage shows giant banners draping government buildings. Elena's face is always next to Nicolae's. They appeared together on currency and posters. State media churned out documentaries praising her intellect. Printing presses ran day and night to produce books under her name. These volumes filled bookstores and libraries across the country. But the indoctrination went deeper. It reached the classrooms. Children memorized facts about her fictitious scientific breakthroughs. Women's organizations were ordered to worship her as the ideal socialist woman. The charade reached its peak with the highest honors. She was awarded the title Hero of Socialist Labor. She became a full member of the Romanian Academy. The uneducated doctor engineer now sat at the very top of the country's intellectual hierarchy. Thus, the lie became the law. A full member of the Romanian Academy. That was the new title granted to the dictator's wife. It was one of the highest honors in the land. But Elena did not stop at titles. She took a seat in the Politburo, the absolute peak of the Communist Party structure. From that chair, she dictated state planning and ideological enforcement. She didn't just attend meetings, she dominated them. One wrong look, one hesitation, and an official was gone. Her temper was legendary. In the corridors of power, silence fell when she walked by. Approval from Elena wasn't just helpful, it was mandatory for survival. The couple resided in the Spring Palace in Bucharest. Inside, gold taps and imported furniture. Outside, the shelves were bare. They had access to French cognac and fine meats. The population struggled to find sugar and oil. Security details guarded their convoys. Ambulances were reserved for their exclusive use. At first glance, a leader's residence, but in reality, a fortress isolating them from their own starving people. The camera captures the glint of crystal chandeliers in the dining hall. Their travels were equally lavish. They brought dozens of aides and bodyguards to grand receptions abroad. 1981 brought a reckoning. The foreign debt hit $11 billion. The economy buckled under the weight. Why did they choose to starve the nation? Experts suggested gradual repayment, but Nicolae and Elena demanded total clearance immediately. The order was given: slash imports, cut food, cut fuel, cut medicine. Production targets overrode human survival. Elena took personal command of industrial sectors. She pointed at blueprints she didn't understand and issued demands that defied physics. Engineers bit their tongues. To correct her was to risk prison. Her word was final law. Productivity plummeted. Machines broke down. But on television, the newsreaders smiled. Propaganda insisted the golden age was in full swing. But the lies could not heat the apartments. By 1982, the lights went out. Electricity became a rare luxury. Gas usage was strictly capped. Then came the cold. Breath steamed in living rooms. Temperatures inside concrete apartment blocks dropped below freezing. Families slept in coats and hats. Hot water became a myth, flowing perhaps once a week for an hour. Footage shows a hospital ward wrapped in darkness, surgeons operated by flashlight. Rural clinics ran out of bandages. Pharmacies sold nothing but aspirin. Hunger became the national state of being. The government rationed bread, meat, and milk down to grams. In the frame, a line of gray coats stretching for 3 city blocks. People joined queues at 3 in the morning. They stood for 6 hours in the snow. Often, they reached the front only to see the shutter roll down. Empty. In Bucharest, gas was cut so often that citizens bought illegal electric hot plates. The grid overloaded. The city went dark. Elena demanded total self-sufficiency. She ordered the earth to produce more crops and factories to make more drugs. It was impossible. She used the National Council for Science and Technology as a whip. Managers faced public humiliation. Scientists faced labor camps. Failure was treated as sabotage. Yet, the Ceaușescus felt no pain. They boarded private jets. They flew to China, Iran, and North Korea. Newsreels show them toasting with foreign dictators surrounded by flowers. Public money fueled their luxury tours, while back home, the Romanian people slowly froze to death. 11,000 officers. That was the official count of the Securitate personnel. But the true army was invisible. By the mid-1980s, 500,000 informants roamed the streets. 1 in every 30 citizens reported on their neighbors. They watched in factories. They listened in bread lines. They planted microphones in bedrooms and under tables. No place was safe. The paranoia was total. Even a whisper in a private kitchen could end a life. If a citizen complained about the cold or the hunger, the file grew. Interrogators didn't ask questions, they demanded names. Why did people risk prison to listen to the radio? The penalty was severe. But the hunger for truth was stronger than the fear of the cell. Families gathered in the dark, windows shut tight. They tuned the dial to Radio Free Europe. Static crackled. Then, the voice of freedom spoke. It told stories of suffering that the state media buried. International groups shouted about human rights abuses. The regime dismissed it all. They called it foreign lies. 1986 marked a turning point. Elena Ceaușescu was no longer just a wife. She was a co-ruler. She took the head seat at the Political Executive Committee. She controlled national commissions on science and education. At first glance, a qualified scientist leading the nation, but in reality, a dropout dictating policy to experts. She walked into ministerial meetings and silenced professors. Her word was law. If she said a building should move, it moved. If she said chemistry worked a certain way, the laws of nature had to bend. But this was only the beginning. As the West turned its back and the Eastern Bloc distanced itself, Elena tightened the screws. She rewrote the school books. Mathematics became political. Biology bowed to ideology. Children stood in freezing classrooms. They didn't learn history. They learned the myth of the Ceaușescus. Footage from the era shows rows of students in uniform. Their eyes are empty. They recite poems about the contributions of the mother of the nation perfectly. One wrong word meant expulsion, or worse. Criticism became a suicide mission. There was no room for debate in the academy. One day, a professor questioned a policy. The next day, his desk was empty. Playwrights burned their scripts. Painters covered their canvases. Loyalty was the only currency that mattered. Competence was irrelevant. The regime replaced brilliant minds with obedient sycophants. The cultural heartbeat of Romania stopped. Elena demanded respect on a global scale. She ordered the printing presses to run day and night. Teams of ghostwriters worked in shifts. They churned out scientific papers she couldn't understand and biographies she didn't write. Entire publishing houses existed solely to polish her ego. These books flooded the market. They were translated into English, French, and German. Diplomats received them as gifts. The camera records, stacks of glossy hardcovers on heavy wooden tables. International conferences displayed them like holy texts. It was an empire built on paper. While the presses spun, the leadership ignored the reality outside the window. 1988, the map of Europe was being redrawn. In Hungary, politicians opened the doors to debate. In Poland, the Solidarity movement took over the streets. Banners waved, voices rose. Even East Germany felt the pressure of a new era. In Moscow, Mikhail Gorbachev pushed for glasnost and perestroika, openness, reform. The Soviet giant was changing its skin. How did Bucharest respond? The regime froze. Elena and Nicolae Ceaușescu did not see opportunity. They saw a trap. They viewed these shifts as direct threats to their survival. They declared that Romania would stand alone. The path would not change. Television screens flickered with a single message. Anchors read hours of speeches attacking foreign ideas. Newspapers printed walls of text warning against subversive influences. The information blockade was total. Romanian citizens had no access to the truth. They were fed a steady diet of state-approved fiction. The narrative was simple. The Ceaușescus were the guardians. The outside world was chaos. At first glance, the nation was stable, but in reality, it was a prison. Life was defined by cold radiators and empty shelves. Scarcity was the norm. Surveillance was the atmosphere. The Securitate listened to phone calls. Neighbors watched neighbors. Fear was the only constant. Intelligence officers compiled reports on the rising anger. They placed files on the desks of the leadership. The data showed dangerous discontent, but Elena refused to read. She pushed the reports away. She denied the hunger. To her, criticism was not a grievance. It was treason. She demanded absolute loyalty from every minister and every factory worker. The country grew isolated. Diplomats stopped calling. The economy entered a freefall. Even loyal party members began to feel the strain. They saw the numbers. They felt the tension in the corridors. But there was no turning back. Elena remained convinced that their control was ironclad. She stood on balconies surrounded by generals and elites. She heard the applause. She believed it was real. The footage shows the couple waving to a crowd. The faces of the people are blurred. The sound of cheering is amplified. In the frame, a perfect system. But away from the cameras, the mood was pitch black. The staged ceremonies could not hide the truth forever. People were reaching their limit. The pressure built in the silence. The explosion was inevitable. December 15th, 1989. The fuse was lit in Timișoara. Government agents arrived to evict Laszlo Tokes, a Hungarian pastor who dared to speak against the regime. They expected compliance. They found a human wall. His congregation did not scatter. They linked arms and blocked the entrance to the church. Locals joined the chain, driven by decades of hunger and cold. It wasn't just a defense of one man, it was a release of accumulated rage. The crowd swelled rapidly over the next 48 hours. What began as a neighborhood dispute turned into a citywide revolt. On December 17th, the order came down. The military and the dreaded Securitate opened fire on unarmed civilians. 60 people were killed in a single day. Hundreds more fell wounded or were dragged away in handcuffs. The regime tried to erase the evidence. Bodies were loaded onto trucks, transported to Bucharest, and cremated in secret to hide the scale of the massacre. Why did they hide the dead? They believed silence would restore order. But the silence was broken. Eyewitnesses smuggled reports to foreign radio stations. The signal beamed back into Romania. The truth was out. By December 18th, the protests returned with greater force. Factories went silent as workers downed their tools. Students marched in columns. Security forces tried to crack down again. But instead of fear, they were met with open defiance. There was no turning back. By December 20th, the balance of power shifted. Timișoara declared itself the first free city of Romania. Army officers in the region lowered their weapons. They refused to shoot their own people. On December 21st, Nicolae Ceaușescu made a fatal calculation. Fresh from a visit to Iran, he demanded a show of absolute authority. He organized a mass rally in Bucharest. 80,000 people filled the central square, bussed in by state organizations to cheer on command. At first glance, a display of loyalty, but in reality, a trap for the dictator. Ceaușescu stepped onto the balcony. He began his standard speech about socialism and unity. But minutes in, a low rumble rose from the back of the crowd. It wasn't applause, it was booing. Slogans against the government pierced the air. Banners waved in protest. The footage shows the dictator's face freezes in disbelief. His mouth hangs open. He taps the microphone, thinking the equipment has failed. Elena Ceaușescu leaned in, desperately trying to calm him, but the damage was done. The national broadcast was cut abruptly. Confusion swept the square. The crowd surged toward the stage, and clashes erupted with security forces. That night, Bucharest became a battlefield. Demonstrators lit bonfires and built barricades. Riot police fired tear gas and live rounds. The sound of sirens mixed with the roar of the mob. Workers from the industrial districts poured into the center, and the government lost control of the streets. By the morning of December 22nd, the regime received the final blow. Defense Minister Vasile Milea was found dead. The official report claimed suicide, but the soldiers believed he was executed for refusing to order a massacre. His death shattered the army's allegiance. Units across Romania turned their tanks around. Some openly joined the protesters, others simply refused to leave their barracks. By noon on December 22nd, the revolutionaries stormed the national television station. The screen went dark, then returned with a new message. A temporary government, the National Salvation Front, announced it was taking power. Gunfire continued to echo across Bucharest. The era was over. 12:09. That was the moment the helicopter lifted off the roof. As gunfire echoed across Bucharest, the Ceaușescus fled the presidential headquarters. They took only a few loyal aides and security officers. But the sky was not safe. Airspace was strictly monitored. Their flight path appeared on radar screens immediately. The pilot panicked. He feared a missile strike. He forced the machine down near Titu, a small town west of Bucharest. The couple attempted to hide. They hijacked a car, but they did not get far. Local police and military officers intercepted them. There was no resistance, just confusion. They were thrown into an armored vehicle. The destination was Târgoviște, 80 kilometers northwest of the capital. The military unit there belonged to the Interior Ministry. The commander was hesitant. He had not taken a side in the revolution yet, but he agreed to hold the package until orders were clarified. Once inside the gates, everything changed. The Ceaușescus were stripped of their formal status instantly. At first glance, they were still the leaders, but in reality, they were already prisoners. Their bodyguards were disarmed, weapons were confiscated. The guards separated the protectors from the protected. The couple was shoved into a small room. It was sparsely furnished, 2 metal-framed beds, plain military blankets. The windows were barred with heavy iron. Guards stood outside the door 24 hours a day. Isolation was total. For the first time in decades, Nicolae and Elena had no access to aides, no advisors, no personal staff. Why did Elena refuse to stay silent? She could not accept the loss of control, but her shouts hit a wall of indifference. Soldiers reported that she spoke constantly. She demanded to contact loyal comrades. She accused the officers of treason. To her, the uprising was a foreign plot. Nicolae was different. He sat quietly. He looked withdrawn. But he still did not believe the regime had fallen. He asked for a typewriter and a notepad. He wanted to draft a presidential declaration to the party members he assumed were still loyal. The request was denied immediately. But this was only the beginning of their humiliation. They were fed standard army rations, boiled potatoes, stale bread, water in tin cups. Bathing was forbidden. Changing clothes was impossible. Both wore the same heavy outfits they had fled Bucharest in. Nicolae in his simple wool coat, Elena in her expensive overcoat and scarf. They slept on narrow cots under harsh, buzzing electric lights. Sleep was difficult. Guards opened the viewing port frequently to inspect them. A doctor checked their vitals once a day. The medical report was brief: stable condition. Outside the base walls, Romania burned. Sporadic gunfire cracked through the air in several cities. Rumors spread like wildfire. People whispered about counterattacks. Units of the Securitate had not surrendered. They remained loyal to the old gods. The newly formed National Salvation Front faced a crisis. Nicolae Iliescu and his defectors felt the pressure rising. The camera records, smoke rising over the city squares. The public demanded justice. They wanted blood. Fears grew rapidly. Keeping the couple alive was dangerous. It could spark a civil war. Intelligence reports circulated disturbing news. Armed groups were preparing a rescue mission. Even the mere survival of the dictator fueled rumors of a political comeback. The army leadership at the Târgoviște garrison grew nervous. No one knew who was truly in charge. Confusion reigned. Events accelerated. By the evening of December 24th, the debate ended. Closed-door talks in Bucharest produced a final solution. The new leadership reached a hard decision. Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu would not be exiled. They would be put on trial the very next day. A military tribunal was established. The process would be swift. There would be no appeal. December 25th, 1989. The clock ticked past 1 in the afternoon. The armored personnel carrier stopped inside the Târgoviște army base. Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were pulled out. It was not a presidential arrival. It was a prisoner transport. They were shoved into a small, nondescript room with yellowed walls. The air smelled of stale tobacco and fear. Why was the trial held in a secret military base? It seemed like a standard security measure, but in reality, the new government was terrified of a rescue mission by loyalist forces. The room was cramped. Tables were pushed together to form a makeshift tribunal. Only a handful of people were present. General Ghica Popa, prosecutor Dan Voinea. A few officers with hands hovering near their holsters. There was no jury. There was no audience. The couple had no prior access to legal counsel. Their court-appointed lawyer, Nicolae Teodorescu, had met them only minutes before the session began. He did not prepare a defense. He barely looked them in the eye. The footage shows. Grainy video captures the couple sitting in their heavy winter coats, cornered by tables. The trial began at approximately 1:20. The charges were read aloud. 5 counts: genocide, armed attack on the people, destruction of public property, undermining the national economy, attempting to flee the country with state funds. The prosecutor threw numbers at them. He claimed 60,000 people had died during the protests. Later, investigations would prove the real number was closer to 1,100. But in that room, accuracy did not matter. The charge also included decades of starvation and oppression, Elena snapped. She did not act like a prisoner. She acted like a queen facing a peasant revolt. The audio picks up. Elena shouts over the prosecutor, her voice shrill and aggressive. She interrupted the officers. She called them provocateurs. She rejected the authority of the court entirely. Nicolae was slightly more composed, but equally defiant. He checked his watch. He looked at the ceiling. When he spoke, he insisted they were still the legitimate heads of state. He demanded to speak with the Grand National Assembly. He claimed the revolution was a coup. He blamed foreign agents. He blamed traitors. But this was not a court of law. The judges had strict instructions to move quickly. They cut off the dictator's speeches. They pressed forward. The trial lacked every standard legal procedure. No physical evidence was placed on the table. No witnesses were called to the stand. The defense had no opportunity to cross-examine anyone. At first glance, a legal proceeding, but in reality, a scripted liquidation. The atmosphere was suffocating. The guards remained on high alert. Through the walls, the muffled sounds of gunfire could still be heard. Chaos was unfolding across Romania. The soldiers knew that loyalist troops could attack the compound at any moment. Events accelerated. Just before 2:45, the charade ended. The court declared its verdict. Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were found guilty on all charges. The sentence was death. Death by firing squad. There was no appeal. There was no delay for a pardon. The ruling demanded immediate execution. The paperwork was signed and announced within minutes. The new leadership viewed this rush as a necessity. They believed the violence in the streets would only stop when the dictator was dead. Any delay could lead to a counter-revolution. The soldiers standing in the corridor received their final orders. They checked their weapons. The execution would take place immediately within the walls of the same military compound. 2:45 p.m. That was the moment the trial ended and the execution began. The soldiers didn't wait for paperwork. They grabbed Nicolae and Elena and marched them out of the makeshift courtroom. They were escorted into the small courtyard of the Starvation military base. It was a bitter winter afternoon. Dirty snow covered the ground. The cold cut through their heavy coats. The execution team was already in position. Captain Ionel Boeru stood ready. Behind him were two elite paratroopers, fingers hovering near their triggers. They had been selected minutes earlier from a group of volunteers. Their orders were absolute. Why was the rush so desperate? Standard protocol requires 24 hours for appeals. But the army feared a rescue mission by the secret police. There was no time for laws. Elena did not go quietly. As they dragged her into the freezing yard, she fought every step. Her voice cracked as she screamed at the officers. She demanded they not be separated. She insisted they face the wall together. She wasn't begging for mercy. She was commanding it. Her disbelief was total. She still shouted that the court had no authority, that she and her husband were the rightful masters of Romania. Nicolae was different. He tried to stand tall, to maintain the image of the conductor. But his body betrayed him. His face was gray. His hands shook uncontrollably as the soldiers grabbed his wrists. The camera records, soldiers forcing their arms behind their backs. Rough knots are tied with hemp rope. Elena struggles against the bonds, shouting at the men she once commanded. At first glance, a defiant first lady, but in reality, a cornered animal realizing the trap has shut. The two were shoved against a plain wall in the corner of the courtyard. It wasn't a ceremonial post. It was a yellow surface near the latrines, chosen only for its privacy and thickness. There was no stage, no blindfolds were offered. There were no last words allowed. The order came instantly. Boeru gave the signal. The paratroopers didn't hesitate. They raised their rifles. Automatic fire erupted before the couple could even steady themselves against the wall. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Dozens of bullets tore into the couple. The force of the volley threw them back against the stone. They collapsed before the firing even stopped. Medical confirmation wasn't needed, but it came seconds later. A doctor approached the crumpled forms and checked for a pulse. None. From the moment they stepped outside to the final silence, less than 5 minutes had passed. The shooting was captured on a single video camera operated by an army officer. The footage shows. The image is shaky and raw. It records the dust settling over the bodies. The cameraman had nearly missed the kill shot because he was changing the battery. But the result was clear. This tape was the most important document in the country. It was proof for the Romanian people and a signal to the outside world. The regime was dead. Days later, television screens across Romania flickered with the footage. People stopped in the streets. For millions, seeing the bodies was the only way to believe the nightmare was over. But the disposal was unceremonious. The bodies were wrapped in canvas. They were thrown into plain wooden coffins and loaded onto a helicopter. The destination was Bucharest. They were buried in the Ghencea Civil Cemetery. No honors, no names, just dirt and crosses marked with false names to prevent vandalism by anti-communists or pilgrimages by loyalists. Eventually, small headstones were added. The execution ended communist rule, but the wounds remained open. The country began a painful crawl toward democracy. Elena became the ultimate symbol of the regime's rot, an uneducated peasant who demanded to be called a world-class scientist. Her arrogance left a bitter aftertaste. Institutions were purged. Her name was scraped off buildings. Her academic papers were exposed as frauds written by others. Her awards were revoked posthumously. But the story didn't end in the dirt. Conspiracy theories flourished for decades. Was it really them? Was the trial staged? Some argued the process was a judicial murder. Others said it was the only way to prevent a civil war. But most agreed on one thing. The era of fear had stopped at that wall. The questions persisted until 2010. The family demanded answers. They requested an exhumation. Workers dug up the rotting coffins in the freezing cold. Samples were taken from the remains. The DNA test left no room for doubt. The bones buried at Gdańsk belonged to Nicolae and Elena. The dictatorship was truly buried.